Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading property experts as they share with you the insider's guide to property investing.
All right, folks, you're on the Property Couch, the insider's guide to property investing. I'm Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Lifestyle's Foxtel channel, or even Foxtel's Lifestyle channel. And he's Ben Kingsley, the chair of the Property Investment Professionals of Australia and the current Property Investment Advisor of the Year. Hello, mate.
G'day, mate. How are you?
Good. I've got a question to ask you.
What's that?
Are you feeling nervous?
Am I feeling nervous?
It's only a matter of weeks before they tell us who the new Property Investment Advisor of the Year is. Do you reckon you're a lock?
I thought you were talking about Aaron Trelaw, isn't it? Coming to the poll.
Hey, I can actually tell you that I was speaking to a female listener this week, and she was very, very complimentary about our podcast. But she says, I tune out at the beginning when you guys talk about the footy, and I tune out at the end when you guys talk about that sign-off, but the rest in the middle is fantastic. So that's good feedback. I also spoke to a client of ours on the way here this morning who's an avid podcast listener, and he said, the best compliment I can give you guys is it sounds like you're talking to me. So that's a good compliment, I thought.
Absolutely.
So you nervous?
No. Why would I be nervous? I mean, at the end of the day, if people like what I do, maybe I'll get the chocolates.
Sounds like Nat Fyfe there, very, very humble. Go Nat Fyfe for our Dockers with a Brownlow. There's a bit more of our footy talk. But more importantly, Ben, in our season of having guests on the couch.
The guest season.
It's the guest season. We're very lucky today because we've got Carolyn Wright, who is a property investor herself, but importantly, she runs a property management business in the Bayside area of Melbourne. And we're really excited to have you on today, Carolyn. How are you?
Very well. Thank you very much.
Welcome to the couch.
Yes, I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you.
Quick question for you. We know that you run a really great property management business, but you're also a property investor.
I am indeed.
What got you into property investing in the first place?
I think influenced by my mum and dad, who were a little bit into property at the time. Not so much now, but mum and dad sort of pushed me to get into the market. And I was a horse rider. I had horses, and I sold a horse.
Equestrian?
Yes, eventing. And I sold a horse for a handsome sum of money, and I actually think he went to the Philippines. So I had a little bit of cash, and then I thought I'll put that into my first property. So that was it.
What age?
You weren't working in the industry at the time?
24, I think. 24. No, not in the industry at the time. Yep. Hospitality at the time.
Yep.
So I put that money into a little unit in North Fitzroy. So that was a good start. Yeah. Great start.
And what sort of research did you do around picking a location? I mean, what was the science?
Oh, I think the first one was a bit of a fluke, actually, guys. I think my mum and dad, sort of influenced me, and we were living in that area, and So the first one, I was pretty green. Green, yeah. I fluked it.
I was going to say, it's a pretty good fluke to be in North Fitzroy. I've got to say,
it was good.
I know some people who've had first time property investments nowhere near as close as that fluke, which is good. And,
it was good.
And it's treated you well, property?
Very, very well. Yes. Yeah, indeed. I mean, I'm passionate about property and, building a portfolio for wealth. And, I'm a lot more educated about it now. So I'm making better decisions now.
So was the first one a set and forget, or did you renovate it, or what's
Renovated the first one.
Yep.
And then went to buy the second in Elwood, which we all know is a great spot.
Yep.
And my mum and dad were really nervous about me holding on to that one to buy the next.
Yep.
And there was no understanding at the time about using the leverage to buy the next one. So unfortunately, I sold that one to buy the next. Okay. And then that's where it all started.
So there's the first mistake?
Well, first regret.
It's actually a four-letter word on this podcast, sold. So you went North Fitzroy, then Elwood. This is starting to look like a very, very good portfolio so far.
It's good country.
Yeah.
The next one?
Next one from there, maybe Newport.
Yep.
A couple in Newport.
Okay.
Yeah, a couple in Newport. So
and we've talked about this before, but it was pretty much the affordability, bang for buck story and renovate
quickly, leverage, buy the next one. So I think I bought the first one in Newport, and then the next one only a couple of months later, and it had already been revalued for about $70,000 more than the purchase price. So it was good times at that time.
An active hands-on investor.
Yes, very much so.
And from that experience, what are some of the messages you can pass on to our listeners in terms of, is it easy to be a hands-on investor where you're doing all this renovation work, or is it hard work?
Yeah, it's hard work. Yeah, I would definitely say hard work. I mean, I was I was working at the time as a flight attendant, so I was renovating houses in the daytime, very hands-on, ripping up carpet, punching nails in floorboards, painting, and then literally getting showered and dressed to go to work in the afternoon. It was pretty full on. So not easy, but if you're determined, you do it.
Yeah. Look, and I think that's the message. I mean, you can be an active investor or you can be a passive investor. Some people who don't have that inclination but just want to be smart investors might just do the buy and hold. But there's others who want to get on an accelerated journey.
Yes.
And we know those people. Usually those people who are getting on that accelerated journey are people who might have lower household incomes and cash flows coming through, but want to basically get that story better for them. And they need to buy something that's entry level, add some value to it, but also chase a bit of that yield. Fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Seeing as you've been investing for so long and you've seen a fair bit, and obviously you see it from the tenant side with your property management business, which we'll talk about shortly.
Yes.
What's your advice to Carolyn back when you were 24, or I guess the first time investor, now that you've been through that process? What did you do that you wouldn't do again, and what would you get first time investors to focus on now?
Look, I definitely hold everything now and do better research on the areas that I bought in. I'd probably be a little bit more inclined to go outside of my home territory and invest, where the research has been done, where the properties are good. So I have kind of wanted to be near my properties, drive past them, touch them, hold them.
So haven't got to that borderless investor stage yet.
I'm there now, and look, I do encourage people. As much as I want everyone to buy in Bayside, I think buying where the investments are good is really critical. Yeah.
I think the other message there, even though you've flipped some properties and sold properties along the journey to get the next one, you would have, I suspect, had to have done that to get some of the next ones because you would have hit that income borrowing power barrier.
That's the tricky bit, the cash flow, because again, I wasn't earning massive income, and that was the tricky bit. My mortgage broker at the time, he just hated, he was like running for cover every time he saw me. He was like, not you again. I'm like, I don't take no for an answer. So
he's probably thinking you're doing all this work and then you're turning the mortgage over. So he's thinking I'm getting all this work.
Yeah, probably.
And then I have to, he gets clawbacks on his commissions. So.
Yeah.
So it's a family affair because we know that your husband's loves property as well. But,
he does.
And we know that he's a listener of the podcast. So there's a very serious question.
Big fan, yes.
Does he listen to the podcast whilst he's flying? Because he's a pilot.
Yes, he is. No, I think mainly in the car. Mainly in the car on the way to work.
No,
he's a massive fan of the podcast. And when we met, he'd bought a couple of properties as well, and we've kept them in our portfolio. Right. And a couple of his properties have been top performers for us. Really. Really great.
Maybe we need to get him on the
absolutely,
podcast.
Absolutely, I think he'd be.
What was his buying decisions in the areas he bought in?
Definitely.
Well, it's interesting that he is a pilot because we always use that as a bit of an analogy because every time a pilot takes off, they have a checklist that they go through no matter how many times they've done it. And they never get ahead of themselves and think, well, I've flown 200 times up from Melbourne to Sydney, so I won't do the checklist. They do it every single time. And that analogy is something that we want to instill in our listeners because even though you've bought properties, even though you've done them, even though you've got to run through the same checklist, the same process and go through the same process, irrespective of if it's the first time you've invested or it's the third or fourth or sixth time. Yes. I think that can be easily lost on investors because I always say it's a process, not an event. But I think because people just buy something to live in, which is an emotional and practical reason, they can often get confused between the difference between buying for that purpose and buying for an investment. And they're two totally different things. That checklist approach, have you found that that's something that you follow?
Yes, to a point. I've followed a checklist. Obviously, location is a big one. And, because of the industry that I'm in, I'm looking for properties all the time that are going to be easily rentable. So I'm following things where there's obviously infrastructure, schools, shops, water obviously being Bayside based.
Yep. Or lifestyle drivers.
Yes, exactly. Yep. Lifestyle drivers, things that are bringing people to an area.
Yep.
So those things are very important to me, and knowing what are the appealing things to renters. So I do have a checklist. It's not a written down one. But
it's kind of a process though. In terms of you go to your broker, it's not as if I always use the analogy that someone says, look, I'm at a barbecue and Billy says to Johnny, hey, look, 22 Smith Street's up for sale. You should buy it. And he goes, why? we'll make a great investment. Well, do you reckon I could do it? Well, yeah. And they sort of go from the property backwards rather than the bigger picture. Because in our process, property is, the actual doing, the implementation is step 4. So there's 3 really critical elements before that.
And the reason why we're having these conversations is we're trying to stop the listeners from making some of those mistakes that we've made in the past. And question without notice, guys, of the process, or what's the biggest mistake you think people do in regards to cutting corners on their process? So do you have an idea of what's the biggest corner that most people cut when they're investing?
In the buying process?
Yeah, just in the selection processes.
I think that a lot of people don't do their research and know what the market that they're buying into is looking for. So I'm actually surprised that more people don't contact people like us, property managers, and say, hey, I'm looking at investing in your area. Tell me about where are good streets, what are good pockets. We very rarely get those calls. What's the demand? Do you get people that want 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms? Are they families? So that surprises me, that people spend so much money on an investment property without really knowing what the market is and who's going to really want that property.
I think that's a really great point, because I was going to say one of the greatest resources for anyone who's looking to do some research is a property manager. But I always think for a lot of people, a lot of their headspace is taken up with the mindset of will I or won't I? I don't want to get into debt. My friend said I shouldn't.
Yep.
And so much space is given to the question of will I or won't I? And when it actually gets to the implementation, it's like, I just want to get this thing done. Because I think that last week I was looking at a property in Essendon, investment grade suburb. It was near the train line. It was near all of Puckle Street and Moonee Ponds nearby. And so what I did is I rang the property manager and I said, look, everything's stacking up, but something's just niggling me a little bit. And we went through the details. And I said, look, it doesn't have off-street parking, but there's parking on the street. And she goes, people in Essendon want off-street parking. Don't get that wrong.
Yes.
And it's like, bingo, thank you. That was that little gem that I just quickly needed to fine-tune to help me make a decision on whether that property, because everything else stacked up really nicely. And I think that's the little insights that the property manager can have. Don't go in that street because I know there's a methamphetamine lab two houses down, or I just know, the intricacies of the day in, day out of people within the suburb.
The micro markets, yes, definitely.
For me, I think one of the biggest reasons why corners are cut is time. People just get time poor, and they just, they follow a process to a point, but then they just get frustrated.
Yep.
And then because they're time poor, they just said, oh, bugger this, that'll do. Do you know what I mean? Rather than sort of making that professional judgment or getting someone to help them make that professional judgment, because they're sitting there going, oh, this is taking too long. I want my weekends back. It's a real problem, this. I'm missing out each time I go to auction or whatever it is. And so they just decide to take action and cut that process down. So they have all these things on the checklist, but they go, oh, near enough's good enough. I want my time back, and they execute, and that's a mistake.
Or fear of missing out. That's another big one that I see as well.
FOMO.
But
Absolutely.
That's a good one. So let's fast forward, okay? You're a flight attendant, you love property, and now you run a very successful property management business. How do we get from there to here?
There to here was a journey where I was really dissatisfied with the property management service I was getting as an investor. So my eyes started to be open to like, wow, this is really poor service that most agents give. But again, I was very naive and I was very much focused on the fees charged, but I didn't really understand what the role was and what they had to do. But I knew that I wasn't happy with the outcomes that I was getting. So that's where, much to my husband's probably regret, he really encouraged me to start my own business.
Well, he has to make an appointment to see you now, does he?
Exactly.
Small business isn't actually a business, is it? It's a life.
It's a life, that's exactly right.
Yeah, we can vouch for that.
So that's where it came from, that desire to start my own business in a market that I thought was really underserviced and customers weren't really looked after. It was a volume business, not about people, but more about numbers. So I was frustrated.
So how did you do your apprenticeship?
I was flying and I was working up in Sydney for McGrath. So I was working at McGrath during the day and literally taking my Qantas uniform and putting it out the back, finishing my day's work, throwing on my uniform and heading off to the airport.
Well, great that you recognise that it wasn't something that you could just jump into. You needed to get some qualifications, some skills, some experience. and learn from the best. And we all know McGrath's as an agency is
Yeah, it was
obviously one of the best agencies in Sydney, and expanding.
It was an amazing experience, really amazing.
Some people say they want to start a business, finding, a frustration like you did in terms of service. They say they want to start a business, but they don't do. Why are you different? Why did you actually take that step? Because that's a pretty good story.
Yeah.
By day I was at McGrath, by night I was flying in planes, and you clearly don't let the grass grow under your feet. What sort of sets you apart from that?
I think I've just always been driven to succeed, and to do things my way. It's to work for businesses. I came back to Melbourne and worked for a few businesses where I felt that things should be done better, but I didn't have control over that. I was a worker and just had to do pretty much what I was told, and I thought there's got to be a better way to do this, and I think I can do it.
And so do you think that that it's a good idea to work with property management businesses that are exclusively property management as opposed to property management and sales businesses?
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. Because we're experts in what we do. We're not second fiddle to a sales department. We are, when you do the same thing every day like that, you become really good at it. And
it's not the poor cousin. That's
what
you're saying.
Exactly
and
right.
we agree, when we're going into a new area and we're researching a new area, we have an extensive interview checklist for property managers before we make recommendations to our clients if we're buying in, say, Brisbane or Sydney or wherever. And so we'll interview those people in that area, and more often than not, we'll give the preferred recommendation to the property manager who that's all they do.
That's all they do.
And it's usually someone who's mature, aged, who's got the experience, but that's all they specialise in, and it's great customer service.
I guess a lot of people focus on fees when they come to property management, but one of the things that I encourage our clients is to the biggest expense that they're ever going to have as a property investor is a vacancy.
Yes.
And so focusing on percentage of fees versus service levels is at your peril. So what's the dialogue that you have around landlords when they come to you and they want to have a chat about fees versus service? What's your feedback?
You're absolutely right, Bryce. I mean, often the cheapest agent is in the long term the most expensive because they're not, they're either inexperienced, not qualified, they don't follow a process. So that can be frustrating because very often it's the difference between a cheap agent and a more expensive one is you're talking a few cups of coffee a week. It's not a lot of money in the whole scheme of things.
I remember having that conversation with a client. He goes, I don't know whether to go with, the recommendation you've got suggested to me is on the high side. I can get 1.5% cheaper if I go with this other guy. And I said, have you actually taken the time to think about how much that actually is dollar-wise? He said, no, we worked it out and it was not significant. I said, so if that agent, because I think your point there, the cheapest agent can be the most expensive is gold, because I think that's absolutely true.
Yes.
So that's what I tend to drive home to the client. It's about ring the agent, see how long it takes for them to call you back.
Exactly. But walk in a tenant's shoes for a day. That's what I say to most owners. They just don't ever do that homework. For a tenant to call on a Monday to see a property and to have a property manager say, look, it's open for 15 minutes this coming Saturday, that owner has just lost a week's rent. The tenant could be moving in on Saturday.
Correct.
If they were there on the ground to show that property to a qualified person today.
It's your biggest investment asset usually.
Yes.
And yet we worry about small amounts of fees.
Yes.
So I have two bugbears. In terms of people who self-manage their own properties, what are you thinking? I mean, tenants, you get a tenant who knows the game and you try and evict that tenant, you will be ruining the day that you decided to self-manage. They get in there and they want this fixed and that fixed and they know how to play the game. You haven't vetted them properly. I mean, for me, a great property manager is actually a human resources manager. They go in and they assess straight away the types of people that they're talking about or talking to.
Yes.
They're interviewing them as they're taking the application from them. They're doing all the vetting because, look, they're on their best behaviour when they're meeting to try and, rent the property. So a great property manager needs to have that unbelievable understanding of who that person is and the quality of that person behind this facade that they're putting on.
I think the property manager shields you from the 1%ers, because we've got one of our team here, Matt. He talks about when he was in the IT space, if someone rang him for a computer fault, he'd purposely ring them back 15 minutes later because he thought as soon as they hang up, they'll get frustrated and they work it out themselves. So he rings them 15 minutes later and say, I'm just calling you back. They go, oh, no, I've sorted it out. It's all cool. And he's going, okay, no problem, hang it up. And I think a property manager can do a little bit of that because if you've got that direct connection with the owner and little 1%, they just jump on the phone to you and it could be Saturday afternoon, could be Sunday morning. Whereas if you've got the property manager who acts as the buffer and you guys have boundaries around when, you can't be called at 2 a.m. in the morning, you can't be called at 11 o'clock at night. Well, you probably can because you're a workaholic. Yes. But it provides that little bit of buffer for the 1%ers so that the real issues get addressed. But those little niggly ones, they just sort themselves out. Yeah, if I can speak. Thank you for finishing my sentence. So what's your feedback on that?
About
just having that property manager as the buffer.
Without a doubt. I mean, just even the management of landlords and tenants is so crucial during that whole tenancy period, and everything too, like down to the documentation. If you're downloading a lease from the internet, we have leases that are watertight. They've been written by people that make sure that we're protecting a landlord's best interest. So there's so many little factors, and like you said, Ben, regarding just even getting to know a tenant during that process. There's one agent that'll greet people at the door, take their name and number, and that's it. There's no interest or conversation with them and getting to know their story. It's getting to know their story is a crucial part of that process of putting a tenant into a property.
And I'll take it even one step further. One of the biggest things for me, if I want my property let, is the property manager needs to sell the property.
Definitely.
Walk them through the property and say, look, this is where the storage is, pull that down, there's the attic up there, you've got great storage through there, rather than, would you like an application? Would you like an application? Would you like an application? Do you want me to call you? Do you want me to call you?
Oh, no, you won't get a call. You won't get a call. I can almost guarantee that.
So it just drives me nuts.
Yes,
So sometimes I have to push back on some property managers and say, get in there and get your best agent in there to sell the property. It's got to be sold to the tenant, just like, we bought it when we thought it was a good investment.
It's critical. And I think also using that point as well is area knowledge. God, now I can't speak.
It's contagious, isn't it?
So knowing the area, because being able to new people to a suburb, being able to talk to them about where the schools are, the distance to the shops, and some of the amenities of an area, that's also quite critical. I know I've got one of my girls showing a property in Bentley East today, and the people have just flown in from Adelaide this morning. So they're new to the area, they're coming to new jobs, they don't know anything. So it is crucial that she's going to point out where the shops are, where the schools are, accessibility to where they're going to be working specifically.
1%ers.
Yes.
It's a concierge service. You're actually providing them with knowledge of how to fit in, how to feel comfortable in the suburb.
Yes.
And that's going to grow a great way for them to say, whatever properties you've got, I want to look at. Because I actually want you to be my property manager.
Definitely, and we will often work with people that we've found or come across that have applied for a property, and maybe that property didn't suit them, but we know that they're going to be an ideal tenant. So if we can, we'll really try and push to get them into another property. But just a little story. We had a tenant that applied for a property in Hampton. I think it was probably about 18 months ago, and we went as far as getting that mum to speak to another local mum about the local school, because she was nervous about which school to choose, and this home was near Hampton Primary, so we found a Hampton Primary mum and said, chat to her, and you
that
can.
Is brilliant.
Yes, and that sealed the deal. We really wanted to rent that property, and they were ideal tenants, but there was that nervousness around the schools.
There's a new tip, Ben. Look for your property manager to be a nurturer. I mean, that's going the extra mile.
That is great customer service.
Now we've got a loyal listener base, as you know, Carolyn, and we've got Harini who's sent us in a property management related question. Hi, your podcast is really informative and been a great resource for us into our foray into property investing in Australia. Would you be able to talk about managing rental through the property manager? What to expect and how to deal with queries for maintenance? My first question is, what is the first thing that a property investor should look for in a property manager? What's your top 2 or 3 things?
Oh, look, there's umpteen things that they need to look for. I think it's definitely about the people and not the company. So it's very much so about the people. Sitting down, having an interview process with them, finding out how their process for letting the property. That's so critical, because that's a big area where you lose money, and you're talking weeks of rent, not days of rent in that process. So finding out their process for leasing out the property and how often the property is going to be open, who's going to be showing it, the management, ongoing management, who's going to manage the property. I mean, I've got a big checklist of things here, but
Reel some of them off for us.
Reel some of them off?
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
all right. So obviously setting the right rental rates, do they know the market to get you the right rent? That's absolutely critical.
Very important.
And again,
That's the first
self-managers get
question
this
they're gonna
wrong
ask
as
you,
well.
aren't they?
So exactly,
It's like,
yes,
how much
what am
can
I
you
going to
rent
get for
my
my property?
property? How much can you get for my
exactly.
property?
And what's it going to cost me?
Yeah.
So setting the right rental rates is really important. And a lot of self-managers get that quite wrong. So self-managers will often try to manage the property themselves, but then they end up getting the rental rate wrong.
Yeah, how many times you heard the story where, when I said, I go, well, we managed the property ourselves, but we haven't put it up for 3 years. It's like,
Yeah, yes.
You haven't put the rent up for
Yes.
3 years? What?
That's my mum.
No wonder your tenants love you.
Yeah, that's my mum. That's why she's kept her tenant for 5 years. Yeah, I can't tell her.
Now,
No wonder they're a great tenant.
We've got a lot more on this list.
Yes.
Do you reckon we should take a short break and then come back and talk more about some of the key
Great,
questions
yes.
you should be asking your property managers?
Yes, definitely.
Sounds like a plan.
Good. Yeah.
All right, folks, we'll be back just after this short break.